For centuries, the faithful have walked through the grand cathedrals of Europe, kneeling before golden altars and marble tombs, believing they were in the presence of saints, holy men and women whose remains connected heaven and earth. But behind the polished marble and the perfumed incense lies a darker truth. The Vatican didn't just guard the bodies of saints, it hid them, buried them, traded them, dismembered them, and sometimes disguised them entirely. Beneath the floors of Rome's most sacred churches lies a secret empire of bones, an empire built not on miracles, but on control. The story of how the Vatican hid the bodies of saints begins not with holiness, but with obsession. From the earliest days of Christianity, relics, the physical remains of martyrs, were believed to possess divine power. A splinter of the true cross could heal the sick. A drop of saintly blood could drive out demons. And bones were everything. They were the church's currency, proof of sanctity, and tools of power. But that power came at a cost. By the 4th century, the demand for relics had become uncontrollable. Pilgrims flooded Rome, desperate to touch the bodies of the holy dead. Tombs were broken open. Graves were looted. Skulls were stolen from catacombs and sold in markets. The church, unable to stop the chaos, decided to claim control of it. Only the Vatican could decide what was sacred, what was genuine, and what would be revealed or hidden. So began one of the strangest chapters in religious history, the Great Concealment of the Saints. In the early centuries, Christians buried their dead in underground catacombs, labyrinths stretching beneath Rome for miles, filled with bodies carved into the rock. When the faith became legal, these catacombs turned into pilgrimage sites. But when barbarian invasions threatened the city, the Vatican faced a terrifying question. What if the relics of the saints, their most holy treasures, fell into enemy hands? The solution was simple and terrifyingly efficient. The church began secretly exhuming the bodies of saints, moving them from their original tombs into hidden vaults beneath the Vatican. Entire teams of monks and priests worked by candlelight, labeling skulls and bones with wax seals and scraps of parchment. Some remains were smuggled out of Rome entirely, hidden in monasteries or shipped to loyal bishops across Europe. To the public, the tombs remained untouched, marble shrines glittering with gold, as if the saints still rested there. But underground, beneath the altars, the reality was different. Many tombs were empty shells, their contents replaced with wax effigies or fragments of cloth. The most famous of these hidden burials took place in the 9th century. Pope Sergius II, fearing Viking raids, ordered that the remains of St. Peter and other apostles be secretly removed from their tombs beneath the Vatican. The bones were hidden in chambers, so well concealed that even later popes struggled to find them again. For centuries, the Church denied it ever happened. But whispers persisted, rumors of a network of hidden crypts under St. Peter's Basilica, accessible only to a few cardinals. In these vaults, it was said, lay the dismembered bodies of saints, packed into gilded coffins, stacked like treasure. When the Renaissance dawned, the Vatican had turned relics into politics. The bones of saints became diplomatic gifts, weapons in spiritual wars. But the secrecy around them grew darker. Some relics didn't belong to saints at all. The Church had created so many holy bodies that even it began to lose track of who was real and who was invented. A 16th century document written by a papal archivist contains a chilling line, asterisk, we know not who half our saints are. Asterisk, it wasn't blasphemy, it was administrative chaos. The Vatican, drowning in relics, created an underground registry known only to a handful of clerics. In it, each saint's body was listed, where it was buried, what parts were distributed, and which had been recreated through substitution. Because if the faithful demanded a relic, the Church had to provide one, even if it meant creating it from nothing. By the time pilgrims bowed before reliquaries in cathedrals across Europe, most of what they worshipped were not whole bodies, but fragments, fingers, ribs, scraps of hair, often divided and traded like currency. But what happened to the rest of those bodies, the ones too sacred or too scandalous to be displayed, is a secret the Vatican has never fully confessed. By the Middle Ages, relics had become the heartbeat of the Catholic world, and the Vatican was their silent puppeteer. Every monastery wanted one, every noble family offered gold for them, and every ruler sought a saint's favor to legitimize his crown. But with so many bones demanded, the line between faith and forgery blurred beyond recognition. Relic merchants roamed Europe like sacred smugglers, carrying bones wrapped in silk, claiming each belonged to a holy martyr. Pilgrims bought them believing they carried divine power, while the Church, overwhelmed and complicit, turned a blind eye. For the Vatican, relics had become both a weapon and a weakness. They inspired devotion, yes, but also greed, deceit, and scandal. By the 12th century, the market had reached grotesque proportions. There were enough fragments of the true cross being sold to build an entire forest. Churches claimed to possess the same saints multiple times: 3 skulls of Mary Magdalene, 4 arms of John the Baptist, and a shocking number of fingers said to belong to St. Peter. The absurdity was so vast that even theologians joked privately that heaven must be full of limbless saints. And yet, the faithful believed. The illusion had to be maintained. So the Vatican devised a solution to hide what could not be explained. Whenever the Church discovered duplicate relics or false remains, it quietly removed them from public view. But rather than destroy them, priests interred them secretly beneath basilicas, often in ossuaries or sealed stone chambers. The Church reasoned that even counterfeit relics had absorbed holiness through centuries of veneration. They couldn't simply be discarded. Thus began the hidden necropolis beneath Rome's sacred ground, a second invisible city of saints. The 13th century marked the height of this hidden traffic. Papal couriers carried crates filled with bones wrapped in velvet, traveling at night between monasteries. They used coded letters to identify shipments: P for pater, father, often referring to apostles; M for martyr, and S for substitute, meaning bones of anonymous believers passed off as saints. One Vatican archivist recorded that when Pope Boniface VIII ordered a new reliquary to be built, the priests could not locate the real remains of the saint it was meant for. They had been misplaced decades earlier. So they replaced them with the bones of an unknown monk and sealed them inside a golden casket. The deception worked. Pilgrims flocked to it, miracles were reported, and donations poured in. The Vatican didn't correct the record. It canonized the lie through silence. But not all concealments were benign. In the 15th century, an investigation led by Bishop Pietro Barocci uncovered something deeply disturbing. Beneath the Church of San Clemente in Rome, workers found an entire chamber filled with skulls and bones, each labeled with parchment tags: unknown saint, duplicate, unfit for display. It was, in essence, a graveyard of holy mistakes, a crypt where the Church buried its excess sanctity. When Barocci brought his findings to the Vatican, the chamber was sealed within days, the records erased. The Vatican understood something chilling. Relics, once exposed as forgeries, didn't lose their power. They threatened the Church's authority. Better to bury them forever than to confess error. But the Church's obsession with holy bodies wasn't only about deception. It was about ownership. Saints were more than symbols. They were spiritual property. Whoever held a saint's body controlled the faith that surrounded it. When relic disputes broke out between rival cities, Venice, Milan, Florence, the Vatican acted like a broker in a macabre marketplace. Cities waged wars to claim saints. In 828 AD, Venetian merchants famously stole the body of Saint Mark from Alexandria, hiding it beneath layers of pork to evade Muslim guards. When the relic reached Venice, the Vatican didn't condemn the theft. It blessed it. The saint's body brought legitimacy and money to the city, and therefore power to the Church. Even popes weren't exempt from the politics of bones. Some quietly ordered the dismemberment of saints to distribute parts across Christendom. A skull to one cathedral, a rib to another. This divine fragmentation ensured loyalty. Every bishop who held a relic was bound to Rome. The Vatican didn't just rule through dogma. It ruled through death. And yet, the Church always feared discovery. Because hidden beneath the candles and incense, beneath the marble floors and Latin prayers, were tombs no one was meant to open. In 1578, A group of workers digging near the Via Salaria accidentally broke into one of these catacombs, the lost burial tunnels of early Christian martyrs. The find sparked chaos. Word spread that entire vaults filled with saintly bones had been found, relics the Vatican had hidden for centuries. Desperate to regain control, the Church quickly declared the bones holy and began exporting them under papal seal to churches across Europe. But historians now know the truth. Most of those bones belonged not to saints, but to ordinary Romans, nameless men, women, and children whose remains were turned into relics overnight. The Church had effectively resurrected a new generation of saints from the common dead. What mattered wasn't authenticity, it was faith. And faith could be manufactured. By the dawn of the Renaissance, the Vatican had turned its secret necropolis into an art form, a world where bones became architecture and death became spectacle. The bodies of saints weren't just preserved, they were staged. Beneath every altar and behind every jeweled reliquary lay a macabre choreography of concealment, embalming, and resurrection. In the private chambers of the Vatican, the work of preparing saints' remains was a sacred science, known only to a select few. They were called custodes sanctorum, guardians of the holy dead. Cloaked in black, these priests operated in candlelit vaults beneath the apostolic palace, where the air was heavy with incense and formaldehyde. Their task was both reverent and horrific, to keep the bodies of saints intact forever, or at least long enough for the faithful to believe in their incorruptibility. When a new saint's body arrived from across Christendom, it was not buried. It was dissected. The organs were removed and placed in silver jars engraved with scripture. The skin was treated with balsam, oils, and sometimes mercury to prevent decay. The flesh darkened and hardened, taking on a waxen hue, halfway between corpse and sculpture. The custodes would then fill the body with cotton, herbs, and resin, sewing it closed with silk thread. Eyes were replaced with glass or painted over with enamel. The result was a figure that looked eerily serene, an imitation of eternal peace. But the process didn't end there. Once the saintly body was prepared, it was dressed in elaborate robes, gold embroidery, jewels, and lace. Hands were positioned in prayer. Lips were parted just enough to suggest divine breath. And finally, the corpse was sealed behind crystal, entombed in reliquaries that gleamed like treasure chests. To the pilgrims who gazed upon them, these saints seemed miraculously preserved, proof of divine favor. But the truth was chemical and calculated. The Church had mastered the art of holy illusion. The deception was not malicious, at least not in the Vatican's eyes. The faithful needed miracles, and the Church provided them. The incorrupt body of a saint inspired belief far more effectively than sermons or scripture. If faith was the soul of a church, spectacle was its beating heart. However, there were those within the clergy who began to whisper uneasily about what they saw in the vaults. Beneath the church of Santa Maria della Concisione in Rome, the Capuchin monks built a crypt unlike any other. There, the bones of thousands of friars were arranged into intricate patterns, chandeliers made of vertebrae, altars framed by skulls, and wings sculpted from shoulder blades. The message was spiritual. What you are, we once were. What we are, you will be. But behind the art lay a grim practicality. The crypt was built after Vatican officials ordered the removal of overflowing graves, a polite term for the mass relocation of decaying corpses from catacombs the Church could no longer hide. The Capuchin crypt was not the only one. Beneath the Vatican itself, in chambers sealed behind frescoed walls, lay ossuaries where the remains of early saints, popes, and unknown blessed were stored together, bones labeled and stacked like relic libraries. In one account from the 17th century, a Jesuit archivist described descending into one of these vaults and finding walls of skulls, all tagged with the names of saints, some crossed out and rewritten. That single line revealed everything. The identities of saints were not sacred, they were negotiable. As relics traveled through Europe, their authenticity was shaped by political convenience. If a region needed a local saint to inspire faith, the Vatican could rediscover one in the catacombs. Sometimes, the body wasn't even local. Records show that the Church quietly reassigned nameless Roman skeletons to serve as new saints for faraway towns in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. These catacomb saints were dressed in armor, crowned with jewels, and displayed as divine protectors. They were beautiful, and they were lies. Yet to the people, they were miracles. Entire cities celebrated the arrival of these gilded corpses with parades, fireworks, and masses. Children were named after them. Churches were built around them. The Vatican, ever watchful, said nothing to contradict the illusion. The Church needed faith more than truth. But sometimes the truth leaked out. In 1804, French archaeologists exploring beneath St. John Lateran discovered a sealed marble chamber filled with coffins. Inside were dozens of bodies, some complete, others reduced to fragments. Their faces were covered in wax masks, painted to resemble living flesh. The find was quietly suppressed, and the remains reburied in secret. Only a handful of witnesses recorded what they saw: the Church's lost saints, preserved like relics of deception. It became clear that the Vatican's hidden vaults were not just tombs, they were archives of control. Each bone, each mummified saint, was a story the Church chose to tell or erase. By the 18th century, the Age of Reason was sweeping across Europe, and with it came a brutal reckoning for the Church's secrets. Enlightenment scholars, armed with skepticism and scalpels, began to question everything that had once been accepted as divine truth. The Vatican, long accustomed to controlling the narrative, suddenly found itself under siege by science. One of the first cracks in the holy illusion appeared in 1753, when a physician named Johann Meckel was granted access to examine a miraculously preserved saint in Cologne. What he found shocked him. The corpse was not incorrupt but embalmed, the skin treated with mercury and resin, the organs removed and replaced with herbs. Meckel published his findings, accusing the Church of deception. The Vatican dismissed it as blasphemy, but the damage was done. The age of blind belief was ending. Soon after, similar exposés began surfacing across Europe. Anatomists dissected relics and discovered that many so-called saints were ordinary skeletons. The catacomb saints, those jeweled, mummified figures sent from Rome to churches in Bavaria and Austria, were revealed to be the remains of anonymous Romans, decorated by nuns to appear divine. Some were found to be composite bodies, skulls from one skeleton, bones from another, all sewn together to form a complete saint. But the Vatican refused to yield. Instead, it retreated deeper into secrecy. The Church quietly recalled many relics, citing the need for restoration, and sealed them away in the same hidden ossuaries where unwanted saints had been buried centuries before. Publicly, the Vatican framed it as reverence, protecting sacred remains from desecration. Privately, it was damage control. The discovery that some relics were fabricated wasn't just embarrassing, it was dangerous. If the saints were false, what else might be? The Church understood that relics were more than bones. They were foundations of faith. Doubt could spread like a plague. But not all Enlightenment investigators were cynics. Some, like the French scholar Antoine de Villiers, believed that the Church's deceit was born not from malice, but from desperation, a centuries-long attempt to preserve the illusion of divine proximity. The faithful demanded proof of heaven, he wrote, and so the priests gave them the only kind they could, flesh. Still, others were less forgiving. In 1822, a German newspaper published an account of workers repairing a chapel near the Vatican who stumbled upon a sealed underground chamber filled with thousands of bones. The article described skeletons dressed in decaying robes, golden halos still fixed to their skulls. Vatican officials arrived within hours, confiscated all notes, and sealed the chamber again. Those workers disappeared from public record soon after. The event reignited rumors that the Vatican maintained vast hidden necropolises beneath its basilicas, not just for saints, but for all the discarded relics of its own making. Some historians believe these subterranean vaults still exist, their entrances sealed behind frescoes and marble slabs. And yet, the Church's fascination with holy remains never died. Even as modern medicine advanced, the Vatican continued to canonize saints whose bodies were mysteriously preserved. though now it was careful never to use the word incorruptible. Instead, they were called intact, protected by divine grace. In some cases, the Church quietly admitted that preservation techniques had been used, embalming, climate control, and chemical treatments, but only in private documents. It was a delicate dance between faith and fabrication, between holiness and horror. In 1903, Pope Pius X ordered an internal audit of relics held in major basilicas. What his clerics found was both astonishing and horrifying. Over 60% of the relics had no verifiable origin. Some were duplicates, others were labeled with contradictory names. In one case, a single bone fragment had been documented as belonging to both St. Cecilia and St. Agnes, two entirely different saints. The report was never released to the public. The findings were buried, literally, along with the questionable relics, in sealed vaults beneath the Vatican gardens. But perhaps the most unsettling revelations came from the Vatican's own restoration teams during the 20th century. While renovating ancient chapels, workers uncovered hollow statues containing human remains. Some had been built directly into altars, hidden behind panels that had not been opened for centuries. Others were walled into niches, accompanied by faded Latin inscriptions that read, "Here lies one who must not be disturbed." When news of these discoveries reached the public, the Vatican responded with careful ambiguity. Yes, some relics were misplaced, it admitted. Yes, history was complex. But the truth, the full extent of what was hidden beneath its churches, remained off limits. Even now, in the digital age, researchers who request access to Vatican burial records encounter silence. The Church maintains that its archives are spiritual, not archaeological, meaning they are exempt from outside scrutiny. The bones beneath Rome are not relics, it insists. They are safeguarded testimonies of faith. And yet, the silence speaks volumes. To this day, beneath the polished marble of St. Peter's Basilica, there are sealed doors that lead to nowhere, bricked corridors rumored to contain ossuaries filled with saints who never were, martyrs whose names were invented, and bodies once worshipped as miracles, but buried as mistakes. What began as devotion ended as deception, and what was once worship became theater. The Vatican, in its effort to protect holiness, created a kingdom of bones that no one dares to exhume. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, science began to trespass where faith once stood unquestioned. Archaeologists, equipped with ground-penetrating radar and forensic scanners, started mapping the hidden layers beneath Rome. What they found resurrected one of the Church's oldest ghosts, the bodies it had tried to forget. In 2003, a Vatican-sponsored excavation beneath the Church of St. Paul outside the walls uncovered dozens of stone sarcophagi sealed centuries ago. Inside, researchers found human remains draped in decayed silk and gold thread, relic wrappings from an age when every bone carried divine value. DNA testing, conducted quietly in collaboration with Italian universities, revealed something unsettling. Many of the remains didn't belong to saints or even clergy. Some were ordinary citizens of ancient Rome, others women and children. None matched the identities carved on the sarcophagi. The Vatican, as always, downplayed the discovery. Officially, it called them symbolic burials. But among historians, the message was clear. The Church's sacred foundation was literally built on the bones of strangers. Still, the deeper question wasn't about who those bodies were, but why they were hidden. And that leads to a darker truth. The Vatican didn't just bury relics to conceal error. It buried them to control memory. The bones that rested beneath its marble halls were records of power, of who was declared holy and who was erased. In many cases, saints' relics were removed not because they were fake, but because they were inconvenient. During the Counter-Reformation, the Church quietly reclassified or removed dozens of saints whose cults had become politically troublesome. Some were tied to heretical movements, others canonized by rival popes during schisms. Their remains were exhumed, stripped of their names, and stored in secret. Officially, their sainthood expired. In reality, they became anonymous corpses in a labyrinth of forgotten holiness. One Jesuit scholar, writing anonymously in 1911, hinted at this buried history. The vaults of the apostolic city contain not only the bones of the blessed, but also those whose blessings were revoked. It was perhaps the closest anyone within the church ever came to admitting that sanctity itself could be undone. But not all secrets stayed buried. In 2018, during renovations near the Vatican embassy in Rome, workers discovered human bones buried beneath a stone courtyard. The Vatican immediately sealed off the site, but the rumors spread faster than the concrete could be poured. Forensic experts later confirmed the remains belonged to a young girl, but her identity was never publicly released. The discovery reopened old wounds about the church's hidden dead and its tendency to bury uncomfortable truths beneath holy ground. It's not just the Vatican either. Across Europe, beneath cathedrals and chapels, archaeologists keep finding hidden tombs, secret ossuaries, and misplaced relics, silent evidence of centuries of manipulation. In Austria, beneath the Abbey of Melk, they found sealed vaults containing disassembled skeletons labeled only with initials, relic fragments that had once been displayed as saints. In Spain, beneath Toledo Cathedral, they uncovered glass jars filled with mummified organs, each marked with the names of long-forgotten martyrs. In France, entire walls of crypts are lined with skulls painted with halos, all once believed to be holy. The pattern is unmistakable. Wherever the Church built its monuments to eternity, it buried the evidence of its own mortal errors. And yet, despite all that has been uncovered, the Vatican's grip on its hidden dead remains unbroken. The Vatican necropolis, the underground city beneath St. Peter's Basilica, is still closed to most researchers. Even those granted access are forbidden from photographing or cataloging specific remains. The Church insists it is preserving sanctity, but historians suspect it's preserving something else: control over the narrative of salvation itself. Because, in the end, relics are more than bones. They are symbols, vessels of belief, containers of fear. And belief, once broken, can never be fully restored. Imagine standing in St. Peter's today. Tourists shuffle across marble floors, cameras flashing, eyes lifted toward Michelangelo's dome. Few realize that beneath their feet lies another Rome, a city of shadows, of saints who never were, of bodies whose names were erased so others could be worshipped. The smell of incense covers the centuries-old odor of decay. The hymns echo over chambers where silence has reigned for millennia. Somewhere down there, sealed behind a wall no one dares to open, lies a tomb marked only with a single Latin inscription: non revelare, do not reveal. Was it a warning? Or a confession? The truth may never emerge fully, because to unearth those bones would be to unearth something far more fragile: faith itself. The Vatican's catacombs, its ossuaries, its reliquaries, they are not merely repositories of death. They are mirrors of the Church's greatest paradox. To preserve holiness, it had to bury its own humanity. And perhaps that's the most haunting revelation of all: that beneath the gold and grandeur, beneath centuries of devotion and deceit, lies not a conspiracy of evil, but a desperate attempt to make the divine visible in a world that cannot bear silence. So, the next time you step into a cathedral, take a moment to listen, not to the choir above, but to the stillness below. Because if the Vatican has taught us anything, it's that sometimes the holiest secrets are the ones buried deepest in the dark.